Okay, it looks like some of the attendees have leveled off a little bit. So to make sure we get through all of our content, we will go ahead and get started. So great to see you all virtually. Thank you for joining our Emerging Sport webinar, Flag Football Takes the Field, from Emerging Sport to NCAA Spotlight. We're thrilled to help share more information about this sport with you today and also hear from some different experts to learn more about what this sport offers for your campus and in the overall NCAA ecosystem. My name is Gretchen Myron. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a director at the National Office and help oversee the Emerging Sports for Women program. I'll introduce my colleague as well, Dr. Ash.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Ashleisha Lokhande. I serve as the Assistant Director of Education and Opportunity and work with Gretchen on the Emerging Sports program. Welcome.
So we're going to start out today by sharing a brief overview of the program and a little bit of kind of the logistics of it. And then we're going to get into more of the sport-specific information. If you didn't know, we did have a previous webinar that covered some more of the basics of the program that will be available as a recording in the coming weeks. So this is going to be a little bit shorter than maybe what you heard in that last webinar. The NCAA is very focused on continuing to support women's sports and women's sports opportunities. Expanding them is one of them, which is why this program exists, and also being able to amplify those on campuses and through conferences. And certainly this all contributes to increased viewership, engagement, and interest in women's sports throughout the NCAA. The NCAA Emerging Sports for Women program was actually created in the early 90s from a recommendation from the NCAA Gender Equity Task Force. The intent of the program was to try to create more opportunities for women to compete in college athletics at the NCAA level, but also allow more flexibility for member schools to sponsor different sports that might better meet their athletic profile, interest, and their needs there. The program is overseen by the NCAA Committee on Access, Opportunity, and Impact. That's an association-wide committee, so we have representatives from all three divisions that help serve and provide insight on the sports. They engage regularly with different updates from the sport leaders and also provide feedback to the divisions about any action steps or legislation that they may want to consider. Since the program's inception in the early 90s, 8 different sports have transitioned to NCAA championship status. We've also had several sports break out divisionally after that transition. So it's been really wonderful to see all of the progress that has been made and the new opportunities created from it. Can we go to the next slide, please? There we go. Thanks. So we currently have 4 emerging sports: equestrian, flag football, rugby, and triathlon. All 4 of these sports are also Olympic sports, which is just another great connection between NCAA college athletics and the USOPC pipeline. We will have webinars for each of these other sports over the coming weeks, and we'll share some links for those in the chat later. Please feel free to sign up for those to learn more about those specific sports as well. They also have very talented and equipped sport leaders that you'll be able to hear from, as well as other administrators. Okay, so now we get to focus a little bit more on flag football. I think many people listening today probably know that there has been a ton of interest in flag football. It is growing rapidly across the youth, high school, collegiate, and even post-collegiate level, which means that it's also been able to move forward throughout the NCAA process. So we wanted to provide a bit of a legislative update of where flag football currently stands and where it's going next. This past spring, flag football met the requirements to be considered for an NCAA championship status from the Emerging Sports program. That means that they had at least 40 different varsity programs meet the minimum contest and participant requirements. You'll see soon that we had more than 40 schools competing, but at least 40 met those minimums. So a really big step that the sport was able to achieve this past spring. The Committee on Access, Opportunity, and Impact that we briefly talked about earlier was able to make a recommendation from that to all 3 divisions to consider the sport for championship status. And so we do anticipate this summer that all 3 divisions will be introducing legislation that they can vote on divisionally in January of 2027. If that is approved by all 3 divisions, then a championship would be established and a sport committee would also be formed, which would have oversight for that championship. That first championship would then be in spring of 2028. So for those of you that are visual learners, our next slide here kind of shows what that looks like visually of the next steps. So we're really at kind of step number 5 of a 8-step process. So we're waiting for that next legislative recommendation from each division. We'll also have some budget approval this summer. So that's already been in the works on the NCAA side of things. And then those divisional votes will take place in January of 2027. All 3 divisions do need to vote in the affirmative to create an NCAA National Collegiate Championship. That championship would also be open to all 3 divisions. So just wanted to clarify that as well. But again, we are seeing great growth here, and so hopefully we'll be able to meet these benchmarks over the next couple of months to meet that championship in spring of 2028 prior to the LA 28 Olympics. I just have a few more items to share before we hand it over to some of the sport experts. So with us today, we have representatives from the RCX Sports Foundation and USA Football. These entities are what we call the sport leaders for our emerging sports. We work with them very closely to help support the growth of flag football throughout the NCAA. They provide feedback and information directly to the committee, which is incredibly useful for their oversight and also for next steps within the legislative and governance process. They're also really that kind of front line to any institutions or conferences that are interested in the sport and have questions. So these will be great contacts for you to have today if you're not familiar with them yet. Their jobs, you see a couple of different items there that they help with. A few that we'll mention is playing rules. That's a very important one for all emerging sports. The NCAA does not oversee any of these playing rules, so our sport leaders do a great job of helping to set those standards for the sport. They also can be very helpful in getting startups information for programs. So they have great on-the-ground contacts with coaches, officials, funding opportunities. They can also help with scheduling. So these are, again, great resources for schools as they're looking to consider adding a program. The last few things that I'll go through are just some really recommendations for anyone on campus here thinking about adding an emerging sport. This is helpful for flag, but also for any sport that you would consider. Emerging sports at the varsity level should be treated like any other sport that you already sponsor. So following NCAA rules and regulations is very important. It's actually super helpful to us if you submit any questions or requests that you have on the legislative side through RISRO so that our staff can review those and provide more direct information to you. Submitting sports sponsorship information and meeting minimum contest and participant requirements are also very important and helpful for the sport's overall growth and just the tracking of that. Again, thinking of emerging sports like any other varsity program is one of the most fundamental things that we often talk about. So when you're hiring, looking at facilities and experiences, what is a flag football student athlete's experience compared to a volleyball player or a baseball player? We want those to be as equitable as possible. And then schools that are also able to engage closely with the sport leaders can help in supporting the sport, maybe pointing out any changes that need to be made or other things that they can consider. Having updated information on your websites and highlighting emerging sports is also a great way to continue to not only support your program, but to help grow it further from there. So with that, we want to get into a little bit more information about the sport itself and hear from our esteemed sport leaders that we have. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Ash, who is going to introduce Eric and Erica, who we have with us today. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I have 2 incredible leaders here from RCX Sports Foundation and USA Football. So I'm going to ask them to get on camera and to say hello and take it from here. Eric, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Dr. Ash, and good day, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on with you for this webinar today. My name is Eric Mays. I am at USA Football. I serve as the Managing Director of High Performance and National Teams. And specific to this process, I've worked with the RCX Sports Foundation and Erica and her team in helping to navigate the process with the emerging sport side. So really excited to share some additional information about what's going on in women's flag football from a pipeline from the earliest entry points all the way to post-collegiate participation, and then walk you through the process even further.
Hi, good
Erica?
afternoon, everyone. My name is Erica Newsom. I'm the executive director of the RCX Sports Foundation based in Atlanta. Want to thank you all for having me on the webinar, and I'm excited about speaking to everybody today. At the RCX Sports Foundation, our mission is really to create greater access to youth sports and help grow opportunities for athletes at every level. And so, one of the areas I've been fortunate to focus on is the continued growth of women's flag football. So we've had an opportunity to work alongside the NFL, the NCAA, various conferences, colleges, and other key stakeholders, really to support your institutions as you explore and launch your programs. So I'm excited to be here today and to share some of what we've learned and discuss how we can continue advancing the sport.
Thank you, Erica. And I will go ahead and jump into a little bit of information about where we currently stand with the sport. From a USA Football standpoint, we serve as a nationally governing body to the sport of flag football in the United States. We're recognized by the USOPC in doing so. And part of that is the really exciting piece that flag football is now a recognized Olympic sport going on to LA 28. So a big piece of that is tracking on some of the growth and development here. And I want to speak to what we've seen thus far related to women's flag. Since the application was submitted, and thank you to the committee for supporting in all three divisions for entering into that. We're really looking at the numbers of institutions that have participated in women's flag in the last academic year. So you see that number 66 there, and then your breakdown between our three divisions. The bulk of that participation being 43 institutions at the Division III level. But one of the really exciting things, especially moving into the next academic year, is over 120 institutions have projected to sponsor flag football next year, which is almost double the number from our previous academic year, which is substantial growth and actually mirrors the growth that we're seeing at the youth level, high school level, and now collegiate. If you go to the next slide, a little bit of a piece on that. So starting with the recruiting bases, and again, I think this is just a continued narrative about the explosion in participation going on across girls and women's flag. So you see some of the high school numbers here. So of our 50 states, 40 states have some sort of offering coming into flag, moving into our next academic cycle. 23 sanctioned, 17 pilot states. This is actually moving so fast. It's very likely that these numbers will change and increase over the next series of weeks. Really great thank you to the RCX Foundation and the NFL for really pushing participation at the high school level amongst girls. You can see the increase in that as we continue to move forward. You look at the NFHS number there, 69,000 reported high school participants in the 24-25 academic year amongst those sanctioned states. That has only increased in 2025, and that's representing a 60% year-over-year growth. One of the pieces on the youth participation, just to add to this, when you talk about the pipeline of athletes coming in, over in 2024, USA Football did a study looking at the last decade of flag football participation. There's an overall increase amongst boys and girls, but there's an over 150% increase for girls specifically in the age group of 6 to 12. So what that shows is not only do you have increasing participation at the high school level due to these sanctioned and piloted states, but you have an influx of youth participation as well. So when you talk about the longevity of a sport, you really are in good hands related to that and what's going on domestically. Also internationally, there are a number of states within countries within the international ecosystem that are recognizing flag. The International Federation of American Football has over 70 members. And of those members, there are countries that are looking at the currently established collegiate ecosystem and the future collegiate ecosystem to bring prospective student athletes into the United States for participation. Countries like Mexico, Japan, the UK, Panama, and Spain have looked at opportunities to send athletes over. So there's a pipeline of those individuals as well. So looking at that, and we'll talk about how the game is played on the field. average roster sizes amongst the three divisions based upon those participating right now sits between 18 and 20. Just a reminder for our Division One members, there is conversations about a roster cap that is still being determined. If you are a member institution that's part of a defendant conference or has opted in to the House settlement, you must comply with any roster limits set forward in Bylaw 17, and we're happy to answer any questions. I know our NCAA colleagues will happily jump in on that, but I wanted to highlight a little bit of what's going on in that space right now. If you want to jump to the next slide for me, just a bit of the competitive format as we're looking at collegiate flag. So this game is a 7-on-7 format. That format includes four 15-minute quarters, and the field, and Erica will jump into this in more detail in a moment. The field size is 80 yards by 40 yards. You have four downs to travel in 20-yard increments. So if you have any questions about the rules or need access to the rules themselves, you can scan that QR code on the right-hand side of our slide, and that'll give you some detail around how this format is played. Looking at the contest requirements of those 66 schools, the minimum contest standard currently is 12 with a maximum limitation of 24. And you do have the opportunity to use up to 3 competitions against club programs to meet those minimum contest requirements. As far as a championship structure, Gretchen did a great job of talking about the future steps leading into an NCAA championship. Right now, we anticipate 10 conferences and 1 multi-divisional league to sponsor flag at the conference level and execute championship events next academic year. And then reigning champs, or RCX, has operated the women's flag finals the last series of years and provided opportunities for national collegiate championship play as well. So we anticipate that will continue, including a single elimination format. So with that, I will pass it over to Erica to jump into more of the logistics around flag football.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Appreciate that. So now what I'll touch on is campus considerations, and we'll talk about facilities and equipment. The standard field size is 80 by 40 plus 2 10-yard end zones, and you can really utilize a football field, soccer field, lacrosse, or even field hockey fields. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that schools think that they need to build a dedicated flag football facility, but in reality, they don't. You can utilize those because a flag field is smaller than a traditional field. And so we've seen schools using the existing football practice field, soccer, lacrosse, and even hockey, like I mentioned before. So for institutions with limited space, this flexibility has been one of the biggest reasons that they've been able to launch a program pretty quickly. Next, as it relates to equipment, so the standard equipment, it's minimal. It includes footballs, flag belts, and mouth guards. And then this field setup includes your down box, yard markers, pylons, and a visible clock, really. And so the advantage there is that it's a relatively low startup cost and equipment needs are minimal. So you're not purchasing, helmets, shoulder pads, or expensive protective gear or anything like that. So it's very minimal. And in terms of your onboarding process, so we have had the opportunity to partner with the NFL. They've been an incredible partner in growing women's flag really at every level. And so through the NFL support, grant funding is available to help institutions offset some of those initial costs associated with launching your program, whether that's equipment, uniforms, or other startup needs. And so at RCX, we also help make connections to other athletic departments that have already launched the programs, which you saw earlier. There are plenty. We can also assist with best practices on scheduling, recruiting, operations, and implementation. We also provide access to resources and partners across the flag ecosystem. And the other thing is we offer scholarships for international students looking to play in the U.S. So Eric mentioned earlier about the pipeline on the international side. We actually just partnered with the NFL to give away 2 scholarships to international students about 2 weeks ago. And one student is from Spain who is going to be playing at the University of Texas, Arlington, and another student is from Canada who will be playing at Wilson University. So we were excited about that, to be able to bring those students over here to the U.S. and give them the opportunity to play. We also, in conjunction with NFL and NCAA, we host a monthly flag informational session that we encourage you all to join as well. And you can, hear more information about just how the state of flag today. So again, our goal is really to help remove as many barriers as possible so that you all can focus on building successful programs. And also, you'll see the QR code on the page at the bottom regarding grant funding through the NFL. So make sure you guys capture that QR code in the event that you need to apply for grant funding, because there is funding available through the NFL. It is limited and it's not guaranteed, and considerations for the funding really will include conference adoption. The funding is for varsity programs. Your season has been determined, so you actually know when your season is going to start. If you have a start date for your season, and then also consideration is given to programs who are starting up sooner rather than later. So yeah, I think that's it on facilities. So next, I'll just talk about your general budgetary considerations, which I'm sure everybody probably wants to know, how much is it going to cost my program? And so happy to say that flag is going to be one of your more affordable sports added, because you really have the flexibility in how you build your program. So expenses, of course, they're going to vary by institution, but the following factors, based on these following factors listed here, your expenses can be pretty low. You can keep them pretty low. So number one, your number of contests. So you have the flexibility in how you manage your schedule during your, inaugural season. And so a lot of conferences we've seen will start with regional competition to keep those expenses low, and they'll help reduce travel costs. And still being able to provide a competitive experience. But, when you travel within the region, of course, your costs are going to be lower. And then looking at your travel schedule, travel, I think, can sometimes be one of your largest variables. But again, some of the institutions have chosen to compete primarily within driving distance for the first few years before they really expand their schedules. And that really helps them out a lot. Next, recruiting expenses and scholarships offered. So that really is going to be entirely up to your institution. That's a decision based on your institution alone. And some schools, everybody does it different. So some schools choose to fully fund the scholarships, and others really, they look at phasing them in over time as their programs grow. So there really isn't a one-size-fits-all model. Roster size and management. So you all can manage your roster sizes based on your available resources. Facilities, uniforms, and equipment, talked about that a little bit ago. So again, these costs are low because there are not a lot of uniforms and equipment and pads and things like that. So you just really want to leverage those, leverage your existing facilities that you have at your institution, and just purchase that really relatively minimal equipment, as I mentioned earlier. Coaches' salaries. So another decision that institutions make is whether to hire a full-time coach immediately or combine responsibilities with an existing staff member, during your startup phase. So you may want to look at that. And so we've really seen successful examples of both approaches. And last, well, no, officials. So as participation continues to grow, so does the pool of trained officials. And we know that, there's a pipeline for officials as well, too, because that's very important. We have to have officials. So many of the conferences are really working together to build those pipelines, especially as the sport expands, because that's really going to be a necessity. And then finally, NCAA division. Whether you're Division 1, 2, or 3, your financial model is going to look different. So programs are really launching, institutions rather, are really launching the programs in the ways that fits their specific budget and their long-term strategic plans. And I would say just in closing, in terms of those considerations, I think the key takeaway really in regard to budget, after working in this space, I think is just launching a program that's financially manageable. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming. So I think as I mentioned, a lot of the institutions, they leverage their existing resources and then they really scale their programs as interest and support for the program continues to grow.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you, Eric.
Thanks.
As we move forward, as you probably saw, my slideshow was ready to bring on the next people before it was their time. But if I can ask our incredible leaders to join us, and Eric, you as well, as we start a panel discussion. So I am going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. And AD, Roshan, I'll start with you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Rashawn Carlton, I'm the athletic director here at Penn State Harrisburg. Excuse me. Been in my role for 20 years, and we just completed our first varsity season of women's flag football. So it's been a great endeavor.
I am Sonia Stills, Commissioner of the Mideastern Athletic Conference. I've been with the conference since 2002, but I've been the commissioner since January of 2022. We have 16 sports now with our addition of women's golf and women's flag football. So we are really, really excited about being a part of this, I don't want to say trend, but this new endeavor of women's flag football.
Well, we appreciate you, and I'm excited to have all of you here as we have some important conversations about flag football. So I want to actually start with Eric. As you continue to talk about flag football, can you tell us about what excites you the most about flag football as it moves closer to championship status?
Yeah, happy to. I think, this is just a really exciting time for the sport. In many ways, flag football's been around for a while, but has really started to gain traction over the last 5 to 10 years, and has seen an explosion of growth, particularly amongst girls and women, since 2020. And what excites me is as the sport has continued to grow and as member institutions or state associations begin to put the opportunity out there for girls and young women and women to play the game, they're continuously surprised by the number of potential players that come in and raise their hand and say, I want to do this, I want to participate. And I think that'll just only continue as member institutions and conferences look to add the sport at the NCAA level. So I'm excited to see that. And I'm also excited to see the response of individuals that aren't familiar with the sport to see what happens when these highly capable women start to play the game. Because I've seen it from the highest end on the international front. And I just can't wait to see that. Also, the second one is when I look at it from a overall participation pipeline, obviously I'm looking for national teams and ultimately the Olympics. It's very exciting for me to lean into what the NCAA has partnered with the USOPC for other sports within the Olympic model, where the collegiate atmosphere helps in the training and development of future Olympians. And now with this opportunity within the NCAA and emerging sport and hopefully sport recognition process, that entire pathway from youth to middle school to high school to collegiate and to post-collegiate is entirely complete for women's flag. So, from a national governing body standpoint, that's very exciting for me to see.
Yeah, I totally understand and agree with you on that one. Commissioner Stills, let's talk about you for a minute. MEAC is the first Division I conference to sponsor flag football in 2026-27 academic year. Can you talk about what motivated your conference to explore sponsoring this sport, and what did the decision-making process look like when you're adding flag football?
Sure. Actually, it came about with a meeting with the NFL for all four HBCU commissioners about 4 years ago. And it was okay. The flag football is going to be in the Olympics. And my mind is like, okay, we have to get an HBCU person in the Olympics. So what can we do? And so from there, we started our Girls on the Gridiron Women's Flag Football Clinic that we've had for the last 4 years. And, just gauging what the interest was. And we had it 2 years at Norfolk State. We had it a year at Morgan State, and we're having it again on the July 19th, back at Morgan State. Um, the participants grew tremendously. It came to be like maybe 50, 75 to almost 200. Young women who want or interested in women's flag football. So you see the interest is there. And so we began to, throughout that process, to talk with our membership about their interest in women's flag football. And I think the biggest push that helped was it being an emerging sport. And that's what really started things to roll. And it's really fortunate that our leadership, our council of presidents bought in, and if they buy in, hey, we're moving, we're really moving. And so I'm really excited about where we've come and where we're getting ready to go with women's flag football.
Yeah, we all are excited along with you. So thank you for that. AD Rashan, Penn State Harrisburg's flag football program transitioned to varsity in 2025-26, and then y'all won the inaugural United East Conference title this spring as well. So can you talk about, from your perspective, what the decision-making process was to add the sport and then transition it from club to varsity status?
Yeah, really, I think it spurred. We're members of the United East Conference, and I think our commissioner also did a really good job in just kind of, really getting out front with the possibilities of this new sport and engaging with the NFL and RCX. And she really promoted the opportunity for, a substantial $10,000 grant for any programs that would start potentially in club status, but make the commitment to advance to varsity status. So, to be honest, in this day and age of tight budgets, we had certainly been having discussions on adding additional sports here at our college. And the opportunity and the excitement around women's flag football, along with that grant for sure, I think made it a little bit easier to have that discussion with our chancellor here on our campus. Once I told him there was kind of some startup funds to help us get off the ground. And so that was really instrumental for us. We started again in club status. But the grant really helped us, with some of the basic essentials for equipment, paying for an initial coach and some of those things. So, again, kudos to the NFL, RCX for providing that funding. Because I think that was really I think the impetus to kind of help us get off the ground. The other important thing for us was just that we just had, a lot of support. We had energy from our student body. Like we had young women on our campus who was like, "Hey, can we get this started?" So that just made it a lot easier for us to kind of get the ball moving with women's flag football.
Yeah, and then win championships, right?
Yeah, hey,
Yeah.
never hurts. Never hurts.
Yeah, never hurts. Yeah. So you talked about grant funding. So I'm going to pass that on to Erica now. to talk about that. Erica, can you talk about the impact of the funding opportunities that RC Sports Foundation has on institutions that are launching flag football programs?
Yes, I think AD Rashawn just gave a great example of the impact of the funding that can be obtained through RCX and the NFL. And as I mentioned earlier, these grants have helped with startup costs, just like they did over with AD Rashawn's institution. So happy to hear that, and happy to hear that everything worked out well for you guys. But it just really, it helps with startup costs to get your program started. And so it allows you to move from we're interested to we're actually ready to get started and get this program off the ground. And so it can help again with equipment, uniforms, he mentioned coaching, any early program needs, allowing your athletic department really to focus on building a sustainable program, while that can help you in those other areas. And then at RCX also, I mentioned we help with scholarships for international students. We also have a program where we provide equipment, startup equipment kits, and sports bras for female players. So you can visit the RCX Sports Foundation website to learn more about what we offer and how you can take advantage of the different things that we help for startup programs. And again, the QR code that we posted earlier will provide additional information as well.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Stills, I'm going to go to you for a minute on this one. Can you talk about how did you build support from institutions and their stakeholders to sponsor flag football at a conference level? And how does MEAC support their member institutions that sponsor these sports?
Yeah, so with the with the Girls in the Gridiron Clinic, it's letting the athletic directors see that there is a pipeline there. There is interest for that. And then when institutions start to look at their Title IX implications and adding women's flag football, like you said, it's a low cost or budget friendly sport to add, but it helps with the Title IX implications of what they have on their campus. I think that has been the biggest thing. And then as we look to see where we want to grow as a conference in our strategic and long range plan, we want to look at those, of course, women's sports that we need to add to our conference. And many of our institutions already have women's flag football as a club team. And so it's an easy transition into the varsity program. So it wasn't too hard of a sell. Once it became named as an emerging sport, that ball just kept rolling right there through our membership. And it quickly, became, it was probably the fastest thing we've probably ever done in adding a sport because the interest is really, really there. And with the support of RCX and the NFL of helping us amplify what we're trying to do as a conference. In addition to that, even working with the Baltimore Ravens as we're going up to Morgan State for our clinic, and they have really been instrumental in supporting what we're trying to do. And I think that's basically how we keep it going and how the energy, and we're really excited. I am really excited about doing this championship. I just want you to know. Like you said, treating it as any other championship. So giving them that championship experience. And so we're really, really leaned into it to the point that I woke up one morning and said, "Oh my God, we don't have a coordinator of officials. We don't have officials." And my staff is like, uh, our coordinator of football officials is doing that for us. So we're moving, and it's so exciting to be able to be in this time and age, to be at the forefront of what's really getting ready to take off.
Love that. Thank you for that. And then AD Rashan, on an institutional level, once you got the grant, can you talk about how you built your staff and also roster during the inaugural years, and what strategies should programs use for roster management?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think so. From our standpoint, yeah, we currently have a kind of part-time staffing model for us. We're in an area where we do have access to, some local good coaches in the area. I will say it was initially as this sport is, obviously just kind of growing. It wasn't the easiest to find a coach initially. You know what I mean, as far as finding someone with obviously that has to have football coaching experience, but also critically important to be able to work really well with young women and college age women. So, trying to find that balance is really critical. And we were just very fortunate to find honestly a local high school coach who was very excited about the introduction of women's flag football. And he jumped right in, was great. Him and his staff, just tremendous in working with our young ladies here on our campus. Um, and so that's kind of how we started the model. And from a part-time perspective, I think a little bit easier on our budget initially. And so we're certainly kind of determining how we'll move forward in the future as far as maybe advancing the coaching position to a full-time position. We'll see how that goes. I'll have that conversation with the powers that be, of course. But so that's kind of how we got started. And honestly, again, our coaching staff just did a tremendous job. Obviously, we had a very successful first year, and they just connected so well with our young ladies. So that's kind of how we got started as far as staffing. As far as building a roster, again, starting from a club status was helpful. We did have a lot of interest initially just from our general student body here on campus. Probably that first club year, 15 to 20, and that fluctuated, but 15 to 20 students who were interested off the bat. And so that there was some just kind of general students, but then we had quite a few athletes who played other sports who said, "Hey, I want to try this as a club in the off season." And so some did that. And then once we advanced, so that first year of club, against the energy around it was just so positive. That first tournament we had, like it was just something different about this sport. The energy was just so amazing. And so that spring, again, we had about 3 or 4 weekends of competition. And after that, the energy was just flowing. And that helped us kind of transition into our varsity season, where again, many of those student athletes or club athletes came and transitioned to varsity status. But we also had a few more kind of graduating or student athletes who had exhausted their eligibility and said, "Hey, like I saw this last year at the club level. I want to play at the varsity level." And so that really helped us with our team this year and kind of really helped us build our roster from a roster management standpoint. Now we're just currently in the stage of, hey, we're out there, we're doing traditional recruiting. We're out there recruiting, juniors and seniors at the high school level and having a lot of success. It's funny. It's almost like in a lot of respects, high school in different areas, high school is a little obviously ahead of college. So there's a lot of high school programs out there in a lot of different places. And so we're just out there just doing traditional recruiting and having a lot of success with that. So, yeah, that puts us kind of where we are today, where this upcoming year we'll have a roster full of some athletes who came from our campus, but we'll also be bringing in a lot of incoming freshmen who were kind of traditionally recruited.
Thank you for that. So I know Commissioner Stills and you both talked about all the exciting things, but I'm sure there are some challenges as well. So as you face these challenges, can you both talk about some of the best practices, maybe 1 or 2 best practices for up and coming programs or established programs as well from your perspective? And Commissioner Stills, we'll start with you.
I think one of the challenges is I think what we kind of overcame because it was that in naming it that emerging sport, getting the rules and the regulations so they can really truly understand how it's going to work for them. And I think once they have that full understanding of how this is going to operate, um, how that scheduling is going to work, and like you said, the travel, you want to make sure that it's even if it's not within our conference, there are other conferences who have institutions. They might not have do it as a conference as a whole, but they have institutions who are sponsoring it. So we can build out the schedule that way. And so I think that probably, and the funding was probably the biggest challenge. But with RCX and NFL in the push, and you have those other pro teams who are very interested in the success of women's flag football, that funding is available and it's out there, and it's really the most budget friendly sport that you could bring to your campus.
Lady Rashawn, do you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, no, I would say, it is such a new sport, so I think just getting to understand everything around it, but like you said, the rules, like when we first started, we had a hard time finding an actual rule book,
Mhm.
and how to lay out a field and so on and so forth. But a lot of that is all kind of established now. But we were just fortunate to have really strong institutional support. But one best practice, I don't think this is any different than any other sport, but is do your best to find a really good coach. Like that's the key. You gotta have, a really good coach and coaching staff to kind of get things moving. Once they start playing, it's like again, I keep repeating myself, but the energy around it is so great. It's it's something I haven't seen before necessarily. But you got to have a great leader of the program. You have to have a great leader of the program. Someone obviously who knows the game of football, but more importantly knows how to connect with young women and put them in a position to have success. So that would probably be my best practice recommendation.
Thank you for that. Both of those were great advices and best practices. And then Erica and Eric, from your perspective, are there any best practices that you would add to this conversation?
I think just from the athletic administrator side of things, from what I've seen, is just having an administrator that's advocating for the sport, not only at their institution, but for conference adoption is important. That's key. So all the institutions within the conference can have access to the sport. Also, the other thing I've seen, peer-to-peer learning, schools that have launched their programs, they're often willing and always able to share their recruiting strategies, staffing models, scheduling approaches, and different things like that. Since it is such a new sport, they're open to sharing lessons learned. Again, I mentioned we have a monthly call, and we have a lot of interested schools, but schools that are already, in the process that share best practices. And so, we found that institutions learn just as much from each other. And then just one other thing, I think that institutions that really view flag as a long-term investment is key, not just as an emerging sport, but really truly a long-term investment. Those are the ones that are really, I think, seeing great success.
Mhm.
I think for me, AD Rashawn, you talked about it, and that was kind of where I was going as well. When you look at the coaching, we talked about the athlete pipeline and that continuing to increase, and the coaching pipeline is increasing as well. But that can be a struggle for some institutions looking to add the sport, because that the coaching ecosystem, especially that those coaches that are familiar with this discipline of flag, because there are different rule sets and how this game is played across the country, it can be difficult. So I do want to, as you're thinking about this from an administrator standpoint, just some avenues to look through. One is NERSA. This game type has been played at that level for many, many years. And there are coaches or former athletes that are familiar with this type that may be interested in coaching, or are already coaching at another level, whether that be high school or another level of collegiate. Also, this sport, and there's some comments in the chat, has been an emerging sport at the NAI level for a series of years. And there are student athletes that are entering into graduation that were the first group of women participating in the sport. And they have the knowledge of the game, and then also, from our experience, are interested in giving back to the game as potential coaches. So that's another potential pool to look at as you're looking to bring in coaches. And then across our programs from the USA Football, and I know of at least three coaches, even on the national team level, that also coach collegiate flag, and the coaches as well. So, there are avenues in which to bring in coaches from the football standpoint. Obviously, you need to look at, can they engage women and lead programs and things of that sort. But I wanted to make sure, just to speak to that, because that, to your point, is a very, very important piece of building a competitive program.
Thank you all. This is really helpful, I'm sure. And, we have lots of questions in the chat. So I'm going to ask Gretchen to come on over and facilitate those questions for us.
Yeah, a huge thank you again. I also couldn't help but thinking the more that you all talked, one of the big lessons from this too is how different entities can come together for a shared goal. And I think we've certainly seen that from RCX Sports Foundation, USA Football, the NFL was mentioned several times. NERSA's even been engaged with this, and obviously at the conference and the institution level. So just a big kudos to all these different groups for getting, on the same page to move in the right direction. We do have some great questions in the chat. So I'm going to start with a couple that are some quick hits that we can answer on the NCAA side and then go ahead and get some over to our panelists. So the first one is, when did flag football become an emerging sport with the NCAA? In January of 2026. So it has only been an emerging sport for a couple of months technically, and it has moved through the process very quickly, but that is when it was voted in to the program by all three divisions. Another person asked, how can they get on the committee? I think that's in reference to the sport committee from a championship perspective, so I'll answer it that way first. When the sport committee is formed, that will be formed like any other NCAA committee. So it will go out as a general listing on the NCAA's website with the description for what they're looking for those NCAA representatives. It will include representatives from all three divisions since this is a national collegiate championship. And any of the divisional processes about how to get on NCAA committees would apply to how those folks are selected. So that is not out there yet. We do expect that will come out a little bit later this year, probably around September or so, that call out will be placed. I think in the actual question, it mentions it at the conference level. So that is, any committees at the conference level are more so handled by individual conferences. So please inquire with your conference if you all have a committee and want to get involved with that. The next question I want to answer on our end is related to the roster cap, which Eric mentioned. We do hope to have more information on that in the next couple of months, since we are very close to the start of the academic year, and certainly we'll update folks as soon as we have that. I'm going to throw this question out maybe to AD Rashawn a little bit about scheduling. So there's a couple questions in here about some different options. The NAIA was mentioned as also having the sport. So were you able to schedule against some NAIA schools this year or club programs? And if not, we'll share the rules on that afterwards, but just wondering if that was helpful to you all.
Yeah, I don't think we ended up playing many NIA programs. We did end up playing a few club programs, even though we were varsity status this year. So we certainly did that. We were fortunate to have a conference schedule again through the United East Conference. Did a great job putting that together. We had a conference schedule, and then also had a playoff and championship tournament. So that was fantastic. Well, one of the neat things about it that I will say in regards to scheduling is that you can play multiple games in one day. So as far as, traveling and, traveling expenses, that kind of thing, particularly in our conference schedule and away schedule, like wherever we go somewhere, we're playing a couple different programs. And so, we're maximizing those transportation and budget dollars from that perspective. So that is very helpful. The games typically kind of move pretty quickly. So getting a couple games in, is helpful. All of our athletes feel like they get if they're traveling, a distance, they're getting a full day of competition by playing at least playing 2 games. So that's helpful from a scheduling perspective as well.
It is, and you answered another question about playing multiple games in a day or a weekend. So thanks for adding that in there as well. Erica,
Sure.
anything else from your perspective on some of the scheduling trends that you've seen between different programs?
Not from my side. I think you answered it very well.
Okay. And just to clarify, the club programs are not junior college programs. So that was a different question in here. Junior colleges as 2-year colleges would not count for minimum contest standards. Please go ahead and review your legislation in your applicable division and work with your compliance office as needed. But generally, 4-year degree granting institutions are what is allowed for those different contest standards. And so we did see several schools competing this year against a handful of NAIA programs and also club programs at those schools too. A different question for the panelists. I think, Erica, this could be helpful for you. If an institution is looking at adding the sport for 27-28, so not this academic year, but the next one, would you still be able to apply for grant funding?
Yes, you would be able to apply for grant funding. I mentioned earlier that consideration is being given to schools who are starting sooner rather than later, but we still encourage everyone to apply because the funding comes, throughout the year. So in the event you don't get it right now, you may get it, around the time you're ready to start. Just depends on, the information that you put down and when you're ready to start. But definitely apply for it if you know you're going to be starting a program. So we'll be able to keep that data as well and add that information to our database so we can keep track of who's starting programs and who's going to be starting programs.
Great. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask one last question here, and then again, we will try to get to these additional ones that we did not reach via email or afterwards as well. This is being recorded, and we'll share that out and hope to share some of those answers at the same time. The last question is, how can we help kind of bridge the pipeline or the gaps between women's youth and high school to collegiate flag football? And then beyond that to post-collegiate with the national team like Eric talked about, and then potentially even the professional league that has been discussed at the NFL level. Any ideas on how folks can be useful in trying to connect those different points throughout the pipeline?
Well, I think first it's creating the opportunity for girls and young women to continue to progress, and that's being done, right? So youth to, like I said, to middle school, to high school, all the way up, and this is what's really exciting about this process. And working together within your constituent bases, within the states that you're in. I know there was a comment earlier about how involved the NFL and NFL clubs are in expanding that. I think all of these groups working together to help tell the story of girls and women's flag and just create the opportunity is the first step. The other is communicating the opportunities out because there's so many different avenues in which we can get in front of parents or aspiring prospective student athletes or student athletes about the next steps in those opportunities. That I'll speak from the national team perspective. Oftentimes we miss because we just haven't been able to communicate and get the information in front of athletes. So, thinking across our areas of influence on how we can tell the story about institutions that are sponsoring women's flag, and being able to provide that list out, or coaches that are interested in getting into the sport and I'm in a specific state and where can I develop and where can I plug in, or officials. This sport is, yes, exploding, but still very much in its infancy. And I think as we're all looking to add it, telling the opportunity about people trying to get in, people trying to get in on where they can go will be important.
Great. Well, I think we probably could keep talking for quite some time, but it's already 1 after the hour and I don't want to hold people longer. So a huge thank you again to all of our panelists today, Eric, Erica, Commissioner Stills, AD Rashawn. We so appreciate you all being here and sharing your expertise. Thank you to everyone that was able to listen. We do have a short survey that we'd love for you to fill out. As Ash mentioned, her PowerPoint has a mind of its own today. So we will email that out to you. Don't worry about grabbing that link on the screen there. We do have additional webinars as well for our other emerging sports, equestrian, triathlon, and rugby coming up. So please feel free to sign up for those. And if you need more information from any of our panelists today, you're welcome to reach out to us, and we can certainly get you connected. But thank you so much for being here and for your interest in flag football. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you.